And it's actually, if you think about it, markets and philanthropy, commerce and philanthropy are two sides of the same coin. Maybe the skill sets are different for each one, but it's about meeting the needs of other people. And think of it in the marketplace. Even if you're that Hollywood caricature, even if you're the kind of personality that makes babies cry and the dogs bark at you when you walk down the street, even if you lust for money, you don't get it unless you provide something that somebody else wants. Adam Smith talked about transactions. Two parties get something. He cited the example of the butcher and the baker giving you dinner. They want your money, you want the food and the goodies. And so each gets something from the exchange. It's all about exchange, zillions of times a day. And some things, some transactions are obviously more fun than others. Buying a handbag, a pair of shoes, a fancy sports car, much more fun than paying the rent or paying the electricity bill, unless you don't have electricity, then suddenly you realize why it's there. But the very people who, human nature being what it is, the very people who complain about the outrage that you have to pay so much for your electricity, don't hesitate to go out and spend $200 on a pair of blue jeans that look like they came from a dumpster. I mean, just as human nature. So what you have out there are two opposites. Free markets meet the needs of other people. Free markets are about voluntary exchange. It's not greed. If you take something from somebody, that's stealing, that's greed. But if it's a voluntary exchange, you each get something for it, even if you don't like paying that electricity bill. Free markets foster cooperation. You look around the ever more complex global supply chains. It's amazing when you parse it down what goes into even making the simplest products. Millions of people cooperating and no one's in charge. They just do it. It's spontaneous, trying to meet the needs of other people. It fosters trust, not blind trust, but trying to figure out ways in which people can do things based on trust. You go to the restaurant, they assume you're going to pay the bill, that you're not going to run out. And it's not naive Pollyannish trust. When eBay came along, I mean, if 30 years ago you described eBay, the idea that people who never knew each other were going to do commerce with one another, and you're going to trust somebody to make a payment, trust somebody to mail what they said they're going to mail, they'd say this is not going to work. So along comes PayPal and other things that make this thing happen in a way that no one could have foreseen. So it does foster trust. It fosters humanity. You know, the idea that markets are humane, well, think of it. It breaks down barriers between people. I mean, when you start a business, you want to have the best people possible. That's new in human affairs, that you would trust anyone beyond your immediate family, beyond your tribe or your ethnic group or community. You just wouldn't do it in the past. Even now in parts of the world, breaking down those traditional barriers, still a process underway. But the commerce does that. You want the talent. And you may not love your neighbor, but you sure want to sell to your neighbor. And so it does break down barriers. It does foster a sense of humanity, getting to know your customer. Also has you get away from just the present. When you make an investment, you're looking to the future. Misers do not found Microsofts, people who have a vision for the future. So even if you think yourself as hard-hearted, tough guy, business person, again, you have to have faith in the future, that there's going to be a future out there to make investments that you don't know whether they're going to have a payoff 3 years, 5 years, 10 years down the road. And it also fosters innovation. Part of the problem with politics is just, again, human nature, is you deal with the here and now, the present. Innovation means imagining things that aren't here and trying to anticipate people's needs. In politics, if something fails, could be a huge political issue. You have to use political muscle to keep it going. Whereas in the marketplace, it fails, you go on and try something else. And as Steve Jobs famously observed, he said when asked, do you do marketing surveys? He said, no, because people don't know what they want until we show them. And so taking things that aren't here and bringing them here. And this is what happens. One of the things that happens when big government starts to stifle a free market is you don't know what you're losing. Imagine 30 years ago, 20 years ago, trying to describe the internet. it would be impossible. To somebody who hasn't experienced it, trying to describe this thing would be almost impossible. And if it never had happened, if it just had stayed in the Defense Department for a narrow application, instead of being put out and developed as it has been, no one would have missed it, because no one ever knew it was there. So another thing markets do is create resources. One of the worst things I think economists did was to define economics as the allocation of scarce resources. Boy, that really gets the blood going. Not. Allocation, oh boy, wow, dismal science. No, actually it's about, certainly in free markets, the creation of resources. Think about oil. Oil is called a natural resource. There's nothing natural about it. In and of itself, it's gooey stuff, glop. You can't eat it, you can't drink it, you can't feed it to camels. I mean, it's just glop. What turned this goo into something we can't live without was human ingenuity. Another thing about markets, free markets, and we should keep this in mind on healthcare, is they've allowed to operate, free markets will always turn scarcity into abundance, will always turn today's luxuries into tomorrow's commonplaces. Well, there was Henry Ford with the automobile. 110 years ago, a car in today's dollars would cost about $150,000. Along comes Henry Ford and his engineers, create the moving assembly line, and turn a toy for the rich into something every working person could afford. You see it in cell phones. 30 years ago, you've seen a picture of those things, big as a shoebox, a 30-minute battery life. First one out of Motorola cost $3,995. Today, over 6 billion, 6.5 billion around the world. Everyone has them. They do everything now, far, far beyond telephony, except maybe comb your hair or grow hair. Maybe the next model will do even that. But it's amazing. Everyone now in the world has literally the world at his or her fingertips, thanks to this abundance. If you want fancy ones, simple ones, all sorts of varieties. So it's also open to all talents. People from the most unlikely backgrounds can succeed in this thing. And it also teaches responsibility. And learning about responsibility, taking control of your own life, those sound like great words, but also means you have to learn to take the knocks of life. No one's always going to be there to pat you on the head and say, oh, it's all right, Johnny. No. Oftentimes you have to learn the hard way, but you become a better person for it. I mentioned Steve Jobs. If you read that book by Walter Isaacson, the biography that came out shortly after he died, he had a terrible personality. He could be a rotten guy, which is one reason why he got fired from his own company before the age of 30. Impossible to be around. Did all the things that you would say a leader could not do. So he learned the hard way. Went out and tried some things. They always didn't work out well. By the time he came back to Apple 12 years later, personality was still the same, but he had learned the hard way how you keep talent, how you nurture talent, even though you may have an impossible personality. It was not an easy thing for him to do, but he became a great leader the hard way. He was not born with it. He learned from the experiences of the free marketplace. So like our founders, free markets are about human nature. Human nature has certain energies, and if they're not channeled in the right direction, they can be very destructive. And so it's about turning scarcity into abundance, meeting the needs and wants of others in a way we don't even realize. We're like the fish in water. The fish don't know they're swimming in the water, and oftentimes we don't understand the system in which we operate because it's often so seamless we don't realize what we're truly a part of. So that's why we did the book, and we made contrasts between a meritocracy of an Apple versus the crony capitalism of a Solyndra, and about how businesses can take the long-term view. If you start a business and it's understood by investors, it's going to be several years before a product comes online. They will cut you the slack if they know that's what the plan is and they see the possibility of a payoff down the road. So if you set the right conditions, people will respond to it and give you a chance to develop it. So in terms of the world in which we live, it is under threat today. This free markets, and I'll get to in a moment the headwinds that stand in the way. But first, let me just say a word, because I know it'll come up in the Q&A, about my business, print media. Joseph Schumpeter has that phrase that we all now know, creative destruction. And in the abstract, we all praise it. Oh yes, the new comes in and the old goes out. Well, living through creative destruction is quite another experience. You don't see so much the creative side, you do see the destructive side. In our world, the web has just begun. We are the first ones hit by it, print media. But the whole world is going to be fundamentally transformed by what the web is doing. You're just getting a little taste of it now with what they call 3D printing. And so it's going to sweep through everything. But in our world, the model we had for 150 years in terms of creating content and marketing, sources of revenue, all been shattered, gone. And so how do you respond? Well, here's how we responded. What we reminded ourselves of was a saying, observation by Peter Drucker, famous management guru, died a few years ago. And he said one thing that private companies can learn from nonprofits is the sense of mission. Remind yourself, what are you in business for? What is it you are trying to achieve? And if you keep in mind what your mission is, then maybe you get less hung up on when the traditional ways of achieving those means change. So with us, we took what my grandfather said. He started Forbes in 1917. He was an immigrant to this country, one of 10 children, grade school education. But he said in the first issue of Forbes, he said, the purpose of business is to produce happiness, not to pile up money. And he believed profoundly in entrepreneurial capitalism, the idea that people can create, discover their talents in whatever field they wish to go into or have a knack for and develop those talents to the fullest. And so in terms of when these sweeping changes started to hit us a few years ago, we had to remind ourselves, and the whole model that we had, and this is why oftentimes it's outsiders that do big things rather than incumbents, because you're accustomed to do things in a certain way, you see things in a certain way. One of the things we lucked on at the beginning was when we started Forbes.com, we made it truly a separate entity. We put it in a separate building. It did not go report to the usual lines of authority. They reported to me and to my brother, not to the print people. And the reason was that human nature being what it is, you're naturally going to twist anything to meet your immediate needs of the business you're in charge of at the time. So we made it separate staff, separate reporting functions, separate administrative. The whole thing was separate because we wanted the baby to grow and not get crushed or distorted. It got big, and then a few years ago, we made the harrowing attempt to combine the two. They are combined today, but it was not easy, and it took a lot of it meant layoffs. It was not a tough thing to go through. We saw firsthand how difficult it is to try, reinvent your company. Wonderful phrase, reinvent your business. Why don't you change it? So if you were a startup, how would you do it? Nice in theory. Try doing it in practice. It reminds you of the phrase, you can eat well or sleep well, but not both. And so today, this is still ongoing. Today, in terms of content creation, when we just had print, we do maybe 1,400 articles a year in Forbes. We still have print doing very well, tied with the web, doing the 1,400 articles. But on the web, content creation is entirely different. We now have contracts with over 1,200 contributors. Your pay is based on the traffic you generate and the repeat traffic you generate. So now we do about 125,000 pieces a year, virtually a magazine every day. Whole new way, mindset, how you do this, how you manage this, and it's still a work in process. On the marketing side, it was pretty much one size fits all. You could have a few permutations, but it was pretty simple in retrospect. Today is what the tailors call bespoke. Everything is different for everybody. Nothing is the same. And one of the things that the web will do if you're not careful is just absolutely ruthlessly commoditize you and turn not dollars to dimes, but dollars to fractions of a penny if you let it. So the importance of branding has never been more important. It's not enough to have a name. You better have something really distinct, or the web will just grind you down. And this gets to the economy today. why in the world do we have this sluggish economy? Why in the world do we have these words, new normal? Well, what we have is the new abnormal. We've never had such a punk recovery. Normally, in American history, when you have a sharp downturn, it's always followed by a sharp upturn. And the question becomes, can you sustain it? None of you are here old enough to remember the 1970s. Yeah, I was trying to do some pandering, but didn't work, which is why I didn't succeed in politics and here today, cadging free breakfasts and free lunches. But back in the 1970s, Bill Simon lived through this. He saw firsthand what government can do when it mucks things up. We had 3 ever more severe recessions. Each one was followed by a sharp upturn. Couldn't sustain it. It wasn't until the early 80s that it all came together with the Reagan reforms. We now think of Reagan reforms, and the U.S. had what in retrospect was a 20-plus year boom. But even in the Depression, even the pit of the Depression, when that finally turned, at least we got a sharp upturn. This time we didn't. And that leads to the question, why? What is going on here? And the only good news out of this is that the headwinds or barriers or whatever you want to call them are easily removed if you just make a few policy changes and if you do a few things right. And it's amazing how simple in concept it is. So what are the things that are holding us back? What are the headwinds? And make no mistake, barring a foreign disaster or another Cyprus, the U.S. economy will do better this year than it did last year. The Republicans do not want a debt ceiling crisis again, and what happened in 2011 and elections in 2012. So we will have a better year, but we're like a car on an open superhighway. Last year we did about 25 miles an hour. This year we may get it up to 40 when we should be doing 75 miles an hour. So what are the barriers holding us back? Well, the first one is the most boring subject in the world.